Hello everyone. Today I will explain the 2019 action thriller movie called No Mercy. Spoiler ahead. The beginning of the film features a woman named In-A who steps out of a car with blood on her legs. She then picks up a large hammer and drags it through an auto shop. It's not yet clear what has happened, but she approaches a man and smashes him with the hammer. The next scene takes us back to the past. In-A, a martial arts champion in the Korean Special Forces who worked as a bodyguard, returns home after being in jail. She is warmly welcomed by her autistic sister Yoon-hae. The sisters are close and look after each other. They promise never to leave each other again. That night, they spend their time catching up and embracing each other, and In-A gives her sister a beautiful hairpin. As they are about to go to sleep, Yoon-hae expresses that she really hates going to school. However, In-A continues to persuade her sister to stay in school, as it was their late father's wish. The next morning, In-A finds that her sister has gone to school, but she has left her a red dress and red high heels. Yoon-hae has also left a note saying she wants In-A around more so they can be together. Seeing this note, In-A realizes her sister needs her, and she needs to take better care of her. Meanwhile, at school, Yoon-hae often becomes the victim of bullying in her class, which is the reason she wants to drop out. She is bullied for having autism. After school, the bullies force her to go with them. On the other hand, In-A is trying to rebuild her bodyguard career by applying to rejoin her former team. She gets an interview with the recruiter, who acknowledges how strong a fighter she is, but unfortunately, he cannot hire her because of her past assault on a man. The bullies take Yoon-hae to a karaoke place and force her to change into more revealing clothes. When Yoon-hae says she wants to go home, she's introduced to 3 boys who run a shady business. The boys plan to disguise Yoon-hae as a prostitute, making her an escort, hooking up with older men in hotel rooms. Later, the 3 boys burst into the room, pretending to rescue Yoon-hae when in fact, they are after the men's wallets so they can steal the money. The boys are confident that the older men will not call the police because the boys know what will happen if they are caught with a little girl. Meanwhile, our protagonist In-A is trying to reach her sister by phone but is getting no response. In-A, anxious and worried, takes to the streets to look for her sister but finds nothing. More troubling, Yoon-hae doesn't come home the next morning. In-A wears the red dress and red shoes that her sister gave her and goes to her school. However, she can't find her sister anywhere. She even confronts Yoon-hae's homeroom teacher about her concerns, but is only told that it's normal for teenagers to be missing for a few days. As she is about to go home, one of Yoon-hae's classmates, worried, decides to reveal Yoon-hae's ordeal. Here In-A gets shown a video wherein Yoon-hae gets her clothes forcibly taken off by the school bullies. The video infuriates her, and so she goes to the karaoke place to confront the school bullies. Then she beats them soundly, forcing them to reveal where they've taken her sister. Based on their information, In-A meets one of the boys and beat him up. As he lies pinned to the floor, he finally admits they no longer have Yoon-hae. Recently, as they tried to run a scam in a hotel room, they encountered a powerful thug named Sangman. The thug refuses to let Yoon-hae go and scare the boys away, so the trio leaves Yoon-hae behind. Their only clue now is the phone number the thug used to book the hotel room with Yoon-hae. In-A dials this number repeatedly but receives no answer. She tries to report it to the police, but they seemingly dismiss her quickly, asking if her sister has just run away. Hearing how challenging and time-consuming it is to prove her sister's kidnapping, she decides to handle the matter herself. On the other side of the city, the thug Sangman meets with a human trafficker, attempting to sell Yoon-hae for a stack of cash. In this deal, Yoon-hae is locked in a room, crying to be released, but only receives a slap from the trafficker's assistant. In-A actively searches for her sister, heading to an address listed on a business card. She doesn't find Sangman there, but does encounter a worker living at that location. She beats him up until he finally confesses and provides her with Sangman's car license plate number. Afterward, In-A takes the worker's car keys and a stun gun and leaves. Meanwhile, the trafficker completes his deal and goes to see Yoon-hae, forcing himself on her. In this process, Yoon-hae bites him until he bleeds. Returning to In-A after gathering more information, she goes to the parking lot where the thug parks, waiting until he appears. After a while, Sangman appears and gets into his car. The woman then follows the car and dials his phone, asking where Yoon-hae is. When the thug refuses to answer, the woman waits until they arrive at a rather quiet street, then charges into his car. Next, Si-Yang gets out of the car and shoots him with the stun gun until he falls unconscious. When Sangman wakes up, he finds himself tied around the neck, and In-A forces him to tell her where Yoon-hae is. Finally, Sangman has no choice but to drive according to her demands. The more he refuses to answer, the more she chokes him, causing him to lose control of the vehicle, and crashes at the roadside. Then, the two engage in an epic quarrel inside the car, beginning to attack each other. In-A seems to have difficulty fighting with the man inside the car, as their strength is similar. Even so, In-A manages to break Sangman's hand and gets information about Yoon-hai. Next, she calls the trafficker through his phone, pretending to be the thug's assistant. The trafficker says he's unhappy with Yoon-hai and wants to sell her quickly. Hearing this, In-A rushes to the trafficker's residence, which is a large massage parlor. Seeing the receptionist wearing Yoon-hai's hair clip, she immediately attacks her and demands to meet the trafficker. Unfortunately, the trafficker has already sold Yoon-hai to someone else, angering In-A, prompting her to attack. The two begin to fight, and the woman shows her abilities. The trafficker tries to stab her inside, but luckily misses. They end up wrestling on the ground. She chokes him with her thigh until he gives up and reveals who he sold Yoon-hai to. Here, the assistant reveals that Yoon-hai had called her before being taken away. But as no one answered, Yoon-hai eventually calls others in a small market for help. However, they decide to sell her to a client called Lucky Supermarket, and a man in a suit comes to pick her up. After getting the phone number for Lucky Supermarket, In-ai immediately tracks the location and heads there. Meanwhile, Yoon-hai is in a car driven by a man in a suit whom we refer to as Jung-woo. On the road, Jung-woo stops at a gas station for food, thinking Yoon-hai is asleep. Yoon-hai then quickly seizes the opportunity to escape, climbing onto a public bus. Unfortunately, when the bus starts moving, Jung-woo stops it and demands entry. He announces that Yoon-hai is his mentally ill sister and successfully drags her off the bus. She pleads with him to let her go, but despite feeling sorry for her, he still stuffs her into the car and takes her away. Back to In-A, as she returns to the road, the thug starts yelling at her from the trunk, demanding to be let go. Having enough of his crying, she gets out of the car to ask him some more questions, and then cuts off the thug's hand. Then she continues to shake the car until the trunk door opens and he falls out. After that, she drives away, leaving him alone. Jung-woo and Yoon-hai have now arrived at a dilapidated building, following the orders of Jung-woo boss, a famous politician named Park. It's revealed that holding Yoon-hai hostage is not accidental. It turns out that Congressman Park has unfinished business with In-A and is kidnapping her sister to lure In-A to him. In fact, Jung-woo wants to help the sisters, but he fears Congressman Park, as the man is deadly and conniving. Interestingly, Lucky Supermarket is the name of a small merchant near In-A's home, and her sister used to frequent this small merchant. In-A arrives at what Yoon calls a mini-market and meets the old man who owns the mini-market. Shockingly, the old man unexpectedly reveals to her that he abused Yoon-hai during In-A in jail. In-A, infuriated and in tears, immediately beats up the old man. Worse yet, the old man is not alone. After In-A tortures and cuts off his fingers, he admits that he and his friends took turns abusing Yoon-hai. This prompts In-A to visit each one of them and beat them all up. First, she goes to a photographer's studio, where she finds pictures of her sister. Then, without hesitation, she beats up the man to learn more about the next guy. The photographer ultimately leads us to an opening, where In-A goes to a workshop and smashes the auto shop owner's arm with a sledgehammer. In pain, the workshop owner finally tells her that it is Park who has taken Yoon-hai now, the politician who imprisoned In-A. The man also reveals that 3 years ago, he abused her in Park's car when Park was having his car fixed in his workshop. When Park's car was ready, the politician accidentally found Yoon-hai's underwear. He then contacted the workshop owner, who replied that the panties belonged to a mentally disabled girl. Since then, Congressman Park has been involved in abusing Yoon-hai. This is why Yoon-hai often comes home late, which worries In-A a lot, but Yoon-hai never says anything to her sister. One day, In-A decides to find out why her sister often comes home late. After school, she sees Yoon-hai sitting in a luxury car, which takes her to a hotel. There, she catches Park drugging her sister and starting to abuse her. In-A immediately attacks the man with a screwdriver and injures his eye. However, her act of saving her sister lands her in prison, as, being a politician, Park easily distorts the truth. Upon learning that In-A has been released from prison, Park orders Jung-woo to kill In-A and Yoon-hai. Returning to the present, In-A, after getting Jung-woo's phone number, immediately calls Jung-woo, asking where she can find Congressman Park. Having had enough of the congressman, Jung-woo hesitates for a moment, then reveals the congressman's location, and In-A begins to go after him. Later, she finds Congressman Park at a private estate, surrounded by his bodyguards, but she remains determined. She waits, then takes out a bodyguard with a taser gun and sneaks in. When she finds Park, she points a gun at his face, demanding to know where Yoon-hai is. Unfortunately, the congressman summons his bodyguards. forcing In-A to fight them all as he drives away. The martial arts champion takes some time and luck to defeat all the guards. After beating all the guards, she climbs back into her car and catches up to Congressman Park. She crashes her car into his in traffic and eventually picks up her gun and shoots at him as they are side by side. She successfully hits his shoulder, but he still manages to escape. The congressman angrily calls Young-woo, demanding that he force Yoon-hae to drink as much cola as possible, even if it kills her. Additionally, he demands Young-woo summon all his followers to kill In-hae. But because Young-woo feels sorry for the girl, he calls In-hae and finally decides to reveal Yoon-hae's and his location. However, when In-hae arrives, she is ambushed, and later we see Young-woo beaten and bloody as the congressman discovers he tried to help the sisters. The congressman, feeling betrayed, stabs Young-woo in the neck, effectively killing him. On the other side of the story, we learn that In-hae survives the ambush and is cleaning up in a public restroom. Then, she begins to prepare for battle, to get her sister back, while at the same time the congressman fixes his fake eye, waiting for In-hae to come after him. Later, just as they are preparing to bury Young-woo's body, In-hae crashes her car into the congressman and his followers. They smash her windows, forcing her to climb out and try to attack her. Being a skilled fighter, she is able to defeat them one by one. At this point, the congressman has retreated to where Yoon-hae is. In-hae continues to struggle with Park's followers until she is subdued. Park proudly displays Yoon-hae by the window for her sister to see, and In-hae finally collapses from exhaustion. One of the followers drags In-hae up, ready to cut her throat, but In-hae takes the knife and fights back against them. These people seem too overconfident, which leads to their failure, and In-hae successfully gets away. She's battered and bruised as she walks in, seeing her sister lying on the couch, barely conscious, just as the congressman attacks her from behind. He hits her, pushes her against the wall, and manages to stab her in the gut, but she uses her remaining will to pin him down and then kills him. Now that they are safe, she moves towards her sister, and they embrace lovingly before going home. On the way, In-hae is holding her bloody insides, struggling with the pain, because no matter what, she needs to get her sister home safely. Subscribe for more content like this and hit the like button to help us. If you want us to review your favorite movie before next time, you can also leave a comment. Take care!